Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Thursday session of class. I'm going to go ahead and record some things for you here. Today, we're going to be talking about adolescent. The chapter in your book, as we discussed before, the kids chapter is really long, the one with child services, and the one with adolescents is rather short. There's actually a lot of overlap, but the chapter actually focuses on some of the differences and stuff. So just because it's short, don't skip it. We're going to go through a few of the things here, and I'll highlight a few things that you will need to focus on. But we'll also bring in a couple other items into the conversation, maybe some things that aren't in the book, just some things that are great to have on your radar if you're thinking about dealing with adolescents or you're thinking of looking into this area. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead um, and get started. We're going to take that awkward Zoom moment where we get all the screens set up, right? And um, there we go. Okay. So when we're talking here about adolescence, I think first of all we need to talk about some definitions. Um, what's the first thing that comes to mind with adolescents? The tweens, the teens, that whole age group right there, and of course for me the thing that I see most nowadays is the selfie, right? That actually kind of plays into some of the developmental stuff we'll get to here in a minute, but adolescents technically are defined between 13 and 19 years of age. There's a couple things to remember. Girls tend to become mature adults sooner than boys. Uh, Not only do they mature a little bit more rapidly physically, but females on the whole tend to become a little bit more in that adult frame of mind a little bit quicker than males. Uh, if you look at physical development, males are they're often physically developing. They're growing a little bit taller even after high school, whereas girls normally by about the end of high school or so, they've reached the the, the peak of their physical stature. So the development uh, is a little bit uneven there. The other thing to throw in the discussion, this part that's not in your book, but is something to throw in the discussion, is the thing that's called the emerging adult generation. It's kind of a phenomenon that is very relevant nowadays. Now, emerging adult. This discussion points to the fact that even though someone is technically an adult at age 18, uh, they there are many 18-year-olds who do not, let's say, who do not exhibit adult behavior. Let's say that. I think we can all say that even though we may call an 18-year-old or 19-year-old an adult, um, very few of us, or I'd say we know very few. Uh, we know very few 18 and 19-year-olds that, while technically they may be adults, we would actually say, yeah, they're adults. Normally, 18, 19-year-olds, even 20, even on in their 20s, we'll still refer to them as kids. They still make a lot of decisions that that we might attribute to immaturity and things of that nature. That's part of the emerging adult discussion. Basically, what the emerging adult discussion says is that, okay, it acknowledges that someone may legally be an adult at age 18, but due to certain circumstances, a host of different circumstances, they may be, uh, they may not actually grow up or fully adult until they may be about 30. And this is where you get someone who may be like 28, living at home with mom, and everybody's okay with it. A lot of this also has to do with with people staying at home longer nowadays, and or some people actually, even if they go off to college, coming back and living at home for a while. It has to do with the return to the nest sort of thing. But the emerging adult discussion is saying that uh, there are some people who are even arguing that the whole moniker of adult maybe should not be applied, and except in situations where maybe certain maturity factors are met, um, and looking at behavior. And there are some people who advocate saying, hey, we really shouldn't call people adults until they're about 30. That's one age that was put forth. That's kind of the whole thing. There is it's just to it just gives uh, voice to something that we all see, that we all know, and that hey, there are some people that they may technically be adults, but they sure don't act like it. And that is the crux of the emerging adult discussion. But we'll leave that to the sociologists to work out, and whether there are more definitions for us in the future. Uh, Another thing about development is that people develop at different rates, and there's a bunch of different things that will affect these rates. Here are two of the things that are highlighted in your book. One is called historical context. It's good to know both of these things, particularly these terms right here, because in you'll see things like historical context referred to in studies, and this is what it means when it comes to development. Historical context simply means that there are certain things that will happen in the world that will make you grow up faster. And world events can do that to you. Examples of being in a war, a war-torn country, or having a draft, something like that. Uh, maybe someone could be 19 years of age and has a couple of younger brothers and sisters, but their parents may pass away tragically in a car accident. They may be forced then to grow up a lot more quickly than their peers, particularly if that happens if that person is a younger age, say if they're 16 or maybe had just turned 18. Many times you will also see in some larger families. It depends. There are some larger families where you may have uh, the older siblings uh, who are caring for the younger, and they're doing this at a much younger age. And so when the younger siblings maybe reach, the older siblings may be caring for the younger at like 16 or 17. They might be providing a lot of the direct care for them, and therefore they're kind of forced to grow up. The younger siblings, when they get to that age, there's no one really for them to care for, and so their childhood, just by circumstances, is allowed to continue a little bit longer. And so these are some of the things when we say historical context, it refers particularly to news or events that can make someone grow up faster. Also, the cultural context. Your book goes in depth on this. Well, a little bit. The cultural context is basically saying that culture matters. There are some cultures that will say basically that you know a a a boy or a girl is considered an adult at say a younger age, or because there are certain expectations of them, or it in this case it might be that different cultures look at marks of adulthood in different ways. So, for example, in our culture, we have a very individualistic culture as opposed to much of the rest of the world, which tends to be in group cultures where the group is more important than the individual. In ours, the individual is obviously more important than the group. But in group cultures, the idea of staying at home until you're married and then leave the home, that's like the norm, and nobody would think anything about it. So therefore, if someone is 30 years old and still living at home, the reason would be in that culture, it's obviously because that person hasn't married. Now they're still an integral part of the family. They still work and function in the family in many different ways, but that would be the reason. Now, in our culture, if there's a 30-year-old that's living at home in mom's basement, we would say, hey, there's a problem. So you can see where culture kind of determines a few things there. Also, culture can determine a few other items when it comes to development and being considered an adult. For example, Bethlehem is a good one. Bethlehem is one where the as far as boys and girls, you don't really have too much of a choice when it comes to your occupation. As you're growing older, Bethlehem is known some uh, for some artisan for their artisans in carving olive wood and some of their embroidery. So basically, it goes like this: if you're a boy, you reach a certain age, you start going with your uncle, with your dad, and you carve olive wood. That's what you do, and so you will do that. If you're a girl, uh, maybe you want to carve olive wood. Well, that's tough because a girl has to go with the mother, with the aunt, uh, in order to learn skills of embroidery. Now, both these things are done because these things will bring up income into the family, and so obviously the child will be seen as more grown up as they are mastering that skill and therefore able to bring in income to the family and subsequently at some point in time be able to support themselves. It's it's one of those things. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way their culture works. As far as some developmental things, there's some things mentioned in your book, pages 136 to 138. Please take a look at that. It's Piaget's um, developmental stages. The main thing that we're concerned with, and I will send this link out as a resource. Kind of goes, it's a really nice quick little blurb on Piaget's developmental stages. Main thing that we're concerned with is teens starting to hit a stage where they're thinking a little bit more rationally. They're able to think rationally on some hypothetical things and abstract concepts, which then translates to them thinking more about abstract concepts such as love, hate. Then that will also inform some of the decisions that they are making on morality. So they'll kind of form a little bit more their sense of morality. It's a time where they're really starting to forge their own identity as they're growing and developing. They're really starting to come into their own with moral reasoning and also basic comprehension and understanding. And also that this time they have more confidence in being able to read and understand how other people are acting, why people are doing the things that they are doing. Now they're not always right, but by this time they've had experience, they've been able to observe people, so they're starting to have confidence in their interpretations, things like that. Now this leads to them doing a lot more, philosophizing, compassion, and compassionate acts can come during this time. Although we do see a lot of self-centeredness, there is often some thoughts about compassion that develop during this time. Some deductive reasoning, some planning, some prioritizing. I know you all are out there saying, hey, my teenager does not plan and prioritize things. Well, it kind of comes in stages, it's in spurts, it's all in development right there. So that's the age that we're looking at. The other thing, this is, I forgot to mention, this is also the stage, it's really interesting, where someone is able to, where it becomes common, where someone's able to think of other people watching them. So obviously, they can imagine like basically an imaginary audience. They can imagine what other people will think a lot more. So this is why like peer pressure and stuff starts to become really big at this stage. And of course, if they're imagining other people watching them and stuff, you can see why selfies are huge too. Also, at this stage, they're at a higher risk of suicide and self-harm. So they're at a higher risk of suicide simply because they're at that stage where, hey, number one, teenagers tend to think they are 10 foot tall and bulletproof. Um, and actually, this is something that has been observed and has been known for a long time. For example, on the and the U.S. military actually looked into this extensively, and it informed the D-Day invasions. The companies that were to hit the hardest, the parts that were going to be the most difficult, where they were going to uh, have to run into some heavy fire, and they were anticipating heavy casualties. They handpicked companies that the average age was around 18 to 19, and the thought was that that these these troops, being at that age, would think, hey, we're 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and so they were more likely to move forward quicker. And so that was the reasoning in choosing some of those companies. Um, and there were obviously there were some people who regretted that, but that did go into the selection process. Also, it's not just that there's this thought of invulnerability, the whole 10 foot tall and bulletproof, that makes for at risk of suicide, but also the impulsiveness that we see in adolescence, and also just the turbulence of adolescent life. There's a lot going on and a lot that they're dealing with. And it seems that that every generation has its own unique things that keep piling on, which can make it very, very difficult, a very difficult time, and also difficult for some caregivers to get a window in and try and help out. There's two things that are discussed in your book, or two general terms that you'll need to know: the suicide ideation and versus gesture. Gesture is where uh, uh, someone may attempt suicide, but they don't really mean to commit suicide, and there could be a host of reasons behind that. But know the difference between those. There's also more of a chance of suicide if a friend has just committed suicide. I remember when I said about the whole peer pressure thing. Uh, Also, and there has to do with some things of complicated grief and some other issues like that. Also, some of the other big issues are with boys, especially if there's an access to a gun, and with girls if you see a lot of low self-esteem. So these will be things, if you're doing a risk assessment, you'll be going through all of these things and noting these. Also, when it comes to self-harm, cutting, uh, do take at least a quick look at that section. Um, Cutting normally happens because it is a means to switch from dealing with emotional pain to dealing with physical pain, and the perception is that dealing with the physical pain is easier. Now we know that the emotional pain doesn't go away. It's still going to be there, but the physical pain is something that is then prioritized as something that's more urgent, and so therefore it's kind of a switch there. There are other reasons as well, but I'll leave that for you to look through your book right there. The other thing that we see a lot more in adolescence, and this is something to pay attention to in your book, this section right here, please note this one, are eating disorders. Boys often overeat, girls often undereat. That's just the way some of the data falls. Um, please know anorexia and bulimia and the circumstances surrounding that. Look to that section really well, because that just may be on a test. Also, another thing with adolescence is to remember, just like with all of us, race and ethnicity will matter. It informs our experiences in life, and therefore it will inform our development. Remember what we said about trauma and about ACEs and things like that. Um, Race, ethnicity, all of that kind of plays into that we see. A really good example of that would be, just to look back at our own recent history this past summer. We're uh, looking what happened with George Floyd, and then all of the fallout from that. Um, is to know that basically there's going to be some different stressors on different populations. We're going to go into this a little bit later when we have that. We're going to be talking about some microaggressions and the like. Um, Trauma. Remember, I said we get into some trauma-informed education, things of that nature. So this is kind of this section right here. Not There's some of this that's in your book, um, but a lot of this is for your just for your knowledge. Trauma, of course, any experience where a person's internal resources are not adequate for external stressors. It's just a simple way to remember it. There's a number of examples that are right there from abuse and abandonment. Uh, Also notice that in there, obviously poverty and chaotic home conditions and insecurities, but also witnessing certain events, witnessing police activities has been noted as a traumatic stressor. Witnessing acts or threats of terrorism, whether that's viewed in person or on television. These things have been known as stressors and have really um, had a huge impact on both children and adolescents. And these are things that kind of like can carry on over time, because some people, they do show stress over the next few weeks and then heal. Maybe they're able to get it out or whatnot. Others will repress it and it boils over later. So you can have some people that may actively repress something, or some people who maybe they just sort of shut down and go into some sort of denial, and they just keep going and going and going. Maybe they try some task-oriented, um, uh, a task-oriented way of dealing with something, where they will go on and on and on and keep themselves busy, and eventually, at some point in time in that person's life, there will come a point where things will boil over, and that's when insecurities and all of these other things will show, and us going back and dealing with it is what will help us then resolve that stress. It's kind of like popping a blister. That's sort of a gross example, but it's one that I find works. Going back and dealing with it, working through it, will then provide some resolution for moving forward, and then the angst that someone is feeling at that time can be alleviated. When you're looking in the book, please note the common denominator of many treatment programs when you're looking at a lot of things for adolescents in the book, there's a common denominator that you'll find. Many of them will offer they'll offer security and stability, and whether it's schedule, food and social securities, etc. And one of the big things is, if we go back to some of the stressors and some of the things that cause trauma, is the chaotic home life, things like that. Having something stable is good for children, and especially for adolescents. Um, as much as they're trying to grow and find their own identity and everything else, having that stability is actually very, very important for them. So a lot of those programs will stress this stability and security. There's going to be a sameness that they can lean on, and it's going to give them stuff to do. Idle hands, um, no good. Giving people stuff to do, keeping their mind on some things. Not only can it open their mind up to, hey, I can actually accomplish something here, or it might open their mind to different hobbies or different lines of work or something like that. But giving someone something to do, also, hey, you're getting out there, you're using your mind, you're using your hands, body, whatever, but it's going to get the endorphins flowing, and it will be therapeutic in and of itself. Those are some of the common denominators. Here's just some quick facts when it comes to childhood and adolescent trauma. Um, here are some of the impacts that we see. This is kind of distilled from the ACEs study and then more recent studies along those lines. So this would be more, I should say, up-to-date information that they find as people are, at that tail end of adolescence, 18, 19, and then moving on into to adulthood. All that childhood trauma will result in these sorts of things. I think some things that are really big, especially when you're looking at the that tail end of adolescence, going back, the 15 times more likely to attempt suicide. That is a big one. Then the trauma that you will see then in post-secondary learners, where this is where we're getting into the 18 and moving out of it's at the tail end of adolescence, moving into that young adulthood. But you'll see these things formed in really in adolescence. I mean, it's not just in post-secondary. You'll see this. You'll see this with high schoolers and so on and so forth. Each one of these things, from the difficulty in focusing, this fear of taking risks. And I don't know, I was looking at this one, anxiety about deadlines, exams, group work, or public speaking. I don't know, I think that's just kind of normal. That's just me. But this was another common thing that the research found. Here are some of the principles for working with some trauma-affected individuals, particularly in some settings. These are just some things to remember. Normalize and validate the feelings and experience. Remember, life happens to all of us, and so being able to reassure somebody that, hey, yeah, I get it. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm so sorry. We can, and I understand why you're feeling that way. Identify and then moving forward, that helps in the communication. Assist them in understanding the past, emotional impact. This is where we're talking about going back through and looking through some things. Then you look at empowerment. This is where our strengths-based approach comes in. And then helping them to understand current challenges, basically to get to understand how coping skills and everything will work together to help someone not only move on from a point, but to make the habit of moving on. And while we can't change the past, there are some things that we can do, particularly some coping skills that we can do to where it's not going to affect us like it once did. And that's the goal. So like I said, I will get that that link out to you. I'll put that in the videos as well. It's just a quick thing for you to check out. There are a number of useful things in that video. The nice thing about it is it's only like 6 or 7 minutes, and it's not one of those that's like an hour long, not like this one. So I hope you got something out of this. If you have any questions, like I said, please contact me, shoot me an email or send me a text or something, and we'll get right on it. Okay, thanks a lot.